It was supposed to be the happiest day of the summer, a big neighborhood cookout where everyone could come together, laugh, share food, and enjoy the sunshine. Families brought coolers filled with sodas, kids raced their bikes down the block, and the smell of sizzling burgers and hot dogs filled the air. It was the kind of gathering that made people proud to live in the community. But just as the laughter got louder and the grills flared with heat, the sound of angry heels clapping against the pavement echoed across the street. Everyone froze when the two Karens, sharp-faced and carrying their clipboards like weapons, stormed toward the cookout. They were the self-proclaimed enforcers of the HOA, women who lived to ruin other people's fun. "This is against HOA policy," one snapped, her eyes narrowing at the folding chairs and picnic tables. The other jabbed her phone in the air, shouting that she was calling the police immediately. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The joy drained from the children's faces, and neighbors looked at one another nervously. The sisters smirked, convinced their call would shut everything down. They bragged about fines, citations, and even the possibility of arrests. The atmosphere turned tense, as though a dark cloud had passed over the sunny street. Nobody wanted trouble, but nobody wanted to back down either. For a moment it felt like the entire party was about to collapse. Then, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, echoing closer and closer. People whispered in worry, some gathering their things, others glaring at the sisters who folded their arms with smug victory written across their faces. But none of them could have predicted what happened when the police actually arrived. The sun was high, pouring down golden light across the quiet suburban street. It was the first real summer weekend after weeks of rain, and the community was buzzing with excitement. Kids were riding their bikes in circles, shrieking with laughter, while parents bustled around setting up long folding tables lined with colorful tablecloths. Balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze, tied to the ends of chairs. Someone had rolled out two massive grills onto the cul-de-sac, and the scent of sizzling beef patties and chicken wings drifted through the air, making stomachs growl even from houses several doors down. It had been weeks in the making. The idea started with Mrs. Lopez, a cheerful woman in her 50s who lived at the corner. She'd suggested to a few neighbors that they should hold a cookout to bring everyone together after such a dreary start to summer. The idea spread quickly, and soon the entire block had pitched in. Some families brought soda, others desserts, while the Johnsons wheeled out their giant speaker system, which was already playing upbeat music. By noon, the street had transformed into a lively festival, buzzing with energy and laughter. Everyone seemed happy to be there, everyone except the two women standing on their porch across the street, glaring at the gathering like it was a crime scene. The Karen sisters, as the neighbors had nicknamed them, were notorious for ruining good times. They lived side by side in nearly identical homes, single, nosy, and forever armed with their HOA rulebooks. Their reputation was carved from years of complaint salons to tall trash cans left out too long, even children laughing too loudly in the evening. And now, as they stood with arms crossed, their eyes fixed on the cookout, it was obvious trouble was brewing. For the moment, though, nobody paid them any mind. The community was too wrapped up in the fun. Parents lounged in lawn chairs, sipping cold lemonade. Mr. Harris manned the grill like a champion, flipping burgers with flair while neighbors lined up with plates. The air buzzed with chatter. People swapped recipes, traded stories, and introduced themselves to new faces. For the first time in a long while, the street felt alive like a family. Children darted in and out of the crowd, sticky-fingered from popsicles, their faces flushed with joy. A group of teens had even set up a small game of basketball at the end of the street, using a portable hoop dragged out from a garage. Cheers rang out whenever someone scored. Music played, dogs barked happily, and the atmosphere was the picture of togetherness. It was in that moment of joy that the Karen sisters made their move. First came the slam of one of their doors. Heads turned briefly as the taller sister, Lydia, stormed down her porch steps. Her sister, Margaret, followed close behind, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Their faces were stiff with disapproval, their lips curled in distaste at the sight of hamburgers being passed around. The party dimmed just slightly as people noticed them approaching, whispers spreading quickly through the crowd. "Here they come," muttered one of the neighbors, rolling his eyes. Lydia marched straight toward the tables, her sandals clicking against the pavement. "This is unacceptable," she snapped loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "This gathering is in direct violation of HOA policy. Large, unapproved parties are strictly prohibited." Her voice was sharp, the kind that sliced through laughter like a blade. Margaret waved her clipboard dramatically, nodding in agreement. "We warned you all before. No block parties without prior authorization. No loud music. No outside grills. Do you think rules are suggestions?" The once cheerful crowd fell quiet, exchanging uneasy glances. Parents pulled their children closer, sensing the tension. A few neighbors sighed in frustration, already bracing for the scene they knew was coming. Everyone on the street had clashed with his sisters before, but this time was different. The cookout had taken weeks of planning. People weren't ready to let it go, so as Mrs. Lopez, the woman who had started the idea, stepped forward calmly, trying to keep her voice even. "Ladies, this isn't hurting anyone. We're just having a friendly community cookout. Everyone's enjoying themselves. We're not disturbing the peace. Not disturbing the peace, Lydia barked out a bitter laugh. Music blasting, cars parked everywhere, grills on the street. You're disturbing every single resident who values order and cleanliness. She shot a glare at the basketball-playing teens, who quickly quieted their game. Margaret shook her clipboard, her pen scratching against the paper as if she were already writing violations. This will result in fines. Every single one of you will be cited. And if you think we're bluffing, you'll see soon enough. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Some looked nervous, nobody wanted to deal with fines. But others looked angry, tired of being bullied by the sisters. A father spoke up from near the grill, his voice firm. It's a Saturday afternoon. We're not doing anything illegal. We're just neighbors enjoying food. Stop trying to ruin everything. The sisters sneered, unimpressed. Lydia whipped out her phone and raised it high in the air. That's it. We're calling the police. Let's see how much fun you're having when officers arrive. Gasps spread through the gathering. Parents' eyes widened. Kids stopped playing, clutching their parents' hands. The once jovial mood had completely shifted into unease. The Karen sisters smirked, feeding off the discomfort. They wanted this. They wanted power. Neighbors looked at each other, torn. Some muttered that it wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe they should pack up. Others shook their heads, unwilling to back down. The smell of grilled food still hung in the air, but now it was tainted with anxiety. Every smile had faded. Lydia's voice cut across the murmurs. Yes, officer, she said into the phone, exaggerating her words so everyone could hear. We have an unauthorized gathering on Maplewood Drive. Loud music, illegal grilling, potential safety hazards. You'd better come quickly. Her sister Margaret added loudly. Tell them there are too many people. It looks dangerous. All eyes were on the sisters, their smug faces glowing with satisfaction as they ended the call. Lydia slipped her phone into her pocket, her lips curling into a victorious smile. The police are on their way. Enjoy the rest of your little party while it lasts. A heavy silence fell over the cookout. Parents exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to start cleaning up or to stand their ground. Kids huddled close, sensing the tension. The music had been turned down, the laughter gone. All that remained was the distant sound of a basketball bouncing against the pavement and the smug smirks of the Karen sisters standing tall in the middle of the street. Then, faintly at first, came the sound that made everyone's heart race. Sirens. They were distant, but growing louder. The children's eyes widened, and the parents straightened, their expressions tightening. The Karen sisters exchanged triumphant glances, as if they had already won. But nobody knew then that what was about to happen would turn their smug victory upside down. The wail of sirens grew louder with every passing second, echoing down Maplewood Drive until it drowned out the faint music still humming from the speakers. Parents stood stiff, unsure what would happen next, while kids clung to their parents' hands with nervous eyes. The Karen sisters stood tall and proud in the middle of the street, smirking like generals about to lead an army. To them, this was victory. They could already imagine the looks on their neighbors' faces when the police ordered the cookout to shut down. The laughter silenced, the grills extinguished, and their power restored. The first police cruiser turned the corner, its red and blue lights flashing against the sunny backdrop. Another followed close behind, then a third. The tires screeched softly as they rolled to a stop right in front of the gathering. Doors opened, and 3 uniformed officers stepped out, their belts clinking with radios and keys. Their expressions were calm but serious as they surveyed the scene. The Karen sisters rushed forward like eager children tattling on a sibling, pointing wildly toward the cookout officers. Lydia cried dramatically, her voice rising above the hush that had fallen over the crowd. Finally, you're here. We told you it's chaos. Look at this street. Unauthorized grills, loud music, way too many people for safety. This is an HOA violation, a disturbance, a complete disregard for rules. Margaret chimed in, waving her clipboard in the officers' faces. Every single one of these people should be fined, if not arrested. We cannot allow this kind of lawlessness in our neighborhood. The officers exchanged glances but didn't respond right away. Instead, one of them, a tall man with calm blue eyes, walked slowly past the sisters and into the heart of the cookout. His eyes moved over the scene carefully, families sitting in folding chairs, children with half-melted popsicles, men and women holding paper plates stacked with food. He noticed the grills, yes, but he also noticed the lack of alcohol, the orderly line of parked cars, and the peaceful laughter that lingered in the air despite the tension. The second officer, a woman with her hair tied neatly in a bun, followed behind. She stopped near the grill where Mr. Harris stood frozen, spatula still in hand. The smell of sizzling burgers reached her nose and she raised an eyebrow. Is that smoked hickory? She asked, almost to herself. Mr. Harris blinked nervously. Yes ma'am, just regular backyard barbecue. The officer's lips twitched into the faintest smile, but she quickly straightened her face again. Meanwhile, the third officer, a stocky man with a friendly demeanor, crouched down to greet one of the children who was staring at him wide-eyed. Hey buddy, he said softly, you having fun today? The boy nodded hesitantly, clutching his juice box. The officer patted his shoulder and stood, shaking his head at the absurdity of the situation. Behind them, the Karen sisters grew impatient. "Well," Lydia snapped, stamping her foot like a spoiled child. "Aren't you going to shut this down? This is outrageous." The tall officer finally turned to face them. His voice was steady, professional. "Ma'am, from what I'm seeing, this looks like a neighborhood cookout. Families, food, music at a reasonable level. Nothing unlawful." Margaret's face twisted in disbelief. "Nothing unlawful? Did you even hear us? This violates HOA policy." The officer nodded slowly, then replied, "The HOA is not the law. We're here to enforce public safety, not neighborhood preferences." His words sliced through the tension like a blade. The crowd erupted in muffled laughter and sighs of relief, while the sisters' faces went red with fury. Still, the officers weren't finished. The woman officer stepped closer to the grill, tilting her head toward the food. "That smells incredible," she admitted finally, her professional demeanor giving way to honesty. "Do you mind if I try one?" The crowd burst into applause and laughter. Mr. Harris, grinning now, flipped a burger onto a bun and handed it to her. She took a bite, her eyes widening in surprise. "That's actually amazing." The stocky officer chuckled and joined in. "Don't leave me out. I could go for one, two." Within moments, all three officers had plates in their hands, piling on burgers, chips, and potato salad offered eagerly by the neighbors. The once tense street was alive again with laughter, music turned back up, and kids running around more freely than before. The officers stood among them, chatting casually with parents, complimenting the food, and even joining the teens for a quick game of basketball. The Karen sisters were frozen in place, their mouths hanging open as they watched their plan backfire spectacularly. They had expected sirens, warnings, maybe even handcuffs, but instead, the very officers they had summoned were now part of the party. "This is unacceptable," Lydia shrieked finally, her voice trembling with anger. "You're supposed to enforce the law, not eat burgers with them." The tall officer wiped his mouth with a napkin and turned to her calmly. "Ma'am, we enforce the law, and the law says there's nothing wrong with people having a cookout on a Saturday afternoon." His words carried weight, silencing the entire street. Margaret stammered, clutching her clipboard tighter. But the rules." The stocky officer cut her off with a chuckle. "HOA rules aren't our concern. You called us for a disturbance, and we found nothing disturbing except maybe how good these ribs are." The crowd roared with laughter, clapping and cheering. The sisters' faces burned crimson. Their hands trembled with frustration, their smugness shattered. For the first time in years, the neighborhood wasn't afraid of them anymore. Nobody looked at them with fear or worryingly with pity and annoyance. They had lost their grip, and everyone knew it. The officers stayed longer than anyone expected, mingling with the crowd, chatting with parents about school safety, joking with kids, and finishing their plates of food. The cookout didn't just continue, it grew louder, happier, and stronger than before, with a newfound sense of unity. People who had once kept to themselves now laughed together, bonded by the ridiculousness of the day. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the officers finally thanked the neighbors for their hospitality. They promised to swing by again sometime, not for a call, but for another plate of ribs. The crowd cheered as the cruisers pulled away, lights flashing one last time. The Karen sisters, humiliated and ignored, stormed back to their houses, slamming their doors so hard the sound echoed down the street. But nobody cared anymore. Music swelled louder, laughter rang out, and the cookout became a story the neighborhood would tell for years to come. The day that was supposed to be ruined had turned into the best party the block had ever seen, and it wasn't the HOA sisters who had the power anymore. It was the community. The morning after the cookout, Maplewood Drive looked different. The folding tables were gone, the grills rolled back into garages, and the colorful balloons had popped or floated away. But the memory of the night before lingered like the smell of charcoal on the air. Neighbors waved to one another with wider smiles than usual, a spark of unity in their eyes. Kids still laughed about how the police had eaten burgers, and adults chuckled about the look on the Karen sisters' faces when their plan backfired. But behind closed curtains, the sisters were stewing. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, her coffee untouched, her jaw tight. Margaret paced back and forth, her slippers slapping against the tile. Both of them had been humiliated in front of the entire community, and worse, in front of the police. The authority they clung to so desperately had been shattered, and the neighborhood was reveling in their defeat. "This cannot stand," Lydia muttered finally, her voice low and bitter. "We can't let them think they've won." Margaret spun around, her face flushed with indignation. "Did you see how they laughed at us? Even the officers laughed. We're the only ones holding this neighborhood together, and now everyone thinks they can just ignore us." She shook her clipboard, as though it held all the power she'd lost. "We have rules for a reason. If we don't enforce them, what's next? Lawn gnomes, trampolines, chaos." Lydia narrowed her eyes, her fingers drumming against the table. "We need to remind them who's in charge. If the police won't help us, we'll find another way." That other way began the very next morning. The sisters started small, prowling the street with their clipboards, scribbling furiously. They photographed recycling bins placed an inch too close to the road. They wrote down license plates of cars parked overnight. They left warning slips taped to doors, unfriendly notes citing obscure HOA bylaws. At first, neighbors shrugged it off. The warnings seemed petty, even laughable, compared to the joy of the cookout. Let them waste their time, one father said as he crumpled up the notice. They can't touch us. But the sisters weren't satisfied with warnings. They escalated. Within a week, Margaret had filed official complaints with the HOA board, requesting fines against multiple families. Lydia spent hours on the phone calling city inspectors to report supposed safety hazards, loose shingles, cracks in sidewalks, weeds growing too tall. The sisters made it their mission to bury the community in paperwork and threats, hoping to smother the unity that had blossomed at the cookout. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking the neighborhood apart, their pettiness drew people closer together. Families who had never spoken before began talking, sharing their frustration, and laughing at the absurdity of the sisters' obsession. When the Harris family received a fine for improper placement of a garden hose, neighbors pitched in to pay it. When the Lopez's got a violation for having too many chairs visible from the street, others showed up with even more chairs, lining them proudly in the yard as an act of solidarity. Each attempt by the sisters to sow fear only fueled more resistance. A private group chat sprung up among the residents, buzzing with jokes, plans, and encouragement. The sisters didn't know it, but their iron grip was slipping faster than ever before. One evening, as the sun sank low, the community gathered again, not for a cookout this time, but for a casual evening hangout in Mrs. Lopez's driveway. Lawn chairs circled up, lemonade flowed, and laughter filled the air. Talk of the sisters' antics came naturally, and soon the group was brainstorming ways to push back. They want us scared, one neighbor said, but the more we laugh at them, the less power they have. They hate seeing us together, another added with a grin. So maybe that's exactly what we should keep doing, being together. The idea took root. Instead of hiding from the sisters' watchful eyes, the neighbors leaned into community life harder than ever. They organized block cleanups, group walks, and impromptu basketball games in the street. Every time the sisters peeked through their blinds, they saw togetherness they couldn't touch. Back in their homes, Lydia and Margaret were fuming, the clipboards filled with notes, but the violations seemed to have no effect anymore. People weren't afraid. If anything, they were mocking them. Margaret slammed her clipboard on the counter one night, her voice breaking with frustration. They're laughing at us. Lydia laughing. We're losing control. Lydia's eyes burned with determination. Then we take it further. If the board won't listen, we'll go above them. We'll call the county. We'll call the fire department. We'll make their lives so difficult they'll regret ever defying us. Margaret nodded eagerly, feeding on her sister's fury. Yes, we'll bury them in complaints. They'll see we're not to be ignored. But while the sisters plotted, the neighborhood prepared. The humiliation of that first day with the police had been a turning point, and nobody wanted to go back to living in fear of two bitter women with clipboards. For the first time, Maplewood Drive wasn't just a collection of houses, it was a community. The battle lines had been drawn. On one side, two sisters clinging desperately to control, armed with rulebooks and grudges. On the other, dozens of families united by laughter, food, and a newfound refusal to bow down. The summer stretched ahead, and though nobody knew exactly what the sisters would try next, one thing was certain. They would not win easily, not anymore. The sisters were not the type to surrender quietly. After weeks of filing complaints and issuing fines, they were enraged to see the neighborhood growing closer, not crumbling apart. Every time they peeked through their curtains, they saw laughter, gatherings, and families smiling in defiance. Their clipboards, once feared symbols of authority, now felt like props in a comedy that everyone else was enjoying at their expense. But Lydia and Margaret were determined to reclaim their power. One evening, Lydia slammed a stack of paperwork onto her kitchen table, startling her sister. The HOA board refuses to take our complaints seriously. If they won't act, we'll go above them. Margaret's eyes lit up. Above them. We'll bring in the county. Lydia hissed. Inspectors, fire marshals, anyone who will listen. If we bury this neighborhood under enough legal red tape, they'll have no choice but to submit. And so began the next phase of their campaign. The sisters scoured the neighborhood with sharper eyes than ever before, photographing extension cords, measuring porch railings, and sniffing out anything that could be exaggerated into a violation. Margaret even went so far as to sneak around at night, flashlight in hand, peering into backyards to search for evidence. Their notebooks filled quickly, and their phones buzzed with calls to every local authority they could find. The first wave came a week later. A county inspector pulled up in a white truck, clipboard in hand. The neighbors watched in confusion as he walked up and down the street, stopping at random houses. At the Lopez home, he cited a potential tripping hazard for a crack in the sidewalk. At the Johnsons, he issued a warning about the height of their hedges. At the Harris residence, he checked the grill for proper clearance from the garage. Though the inspector was polite, the neighbors knew exactly who was behind it. And when they looked across the street, the sight of the Karen sisters peeking gleefully through their curtains confirmed their suspicions. At first, the neighbors were discouraged. The notices were piling up, and though many were minor, the idea of fines or costly repairs loomed over them. Some families muttered that maybe it would be easier to back down, to stop drawing attention. That was exactly what the sisters wanted, to scare them into silence, but the community had come too far to surrender. At the next informal gathering, the neighbors huddled together in Mrs. Lopez's driveway once again, the glow of string lights illuminating determined faces. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Harris said, holding up his warning slip. "They think they can control us with paperwork now. They want us divided." Mrs. Lopez reminded them, her voice calm but strong. "If we panic, they win. But if we stay united, we'll find a way through this." It was then that one of the younger neighbors, a man named Kevin who worked in local government, spoke up. "You know, inspectors only come out when they get reports, and if they find nothing major, the case usually closes. We just need to make sure our houses are squeaky clean when they show up. That way, the sisters waste their time and the county's." The idea caught fire immediately. The neighbors formed teams, helping one another fix minor issues before inspectors could flag them. Cracks in sidewalks were filled with cement, hedges trimmed neatly, lawns mowed to perfection. The kids even pitched in, painting fences and sweeping sidewalks. Instead of weakening the community, the sisters' complaints had galvanized it. Maplewood Drive began to shine brighter than ever before, so pristine that even the most determined inspector couldn't find much to write down. When the fire marshal arrived 2 weeks later, expecting chaos, he found tidy yards, safe grills, and even a clearly marked fire extinguisher placed near every barbecue. He left, shaking his head, muttering that the reports had been grossly exaggerated. The sisters, watching from their porch, grew livid. Their plan was crumbling, and worse, the neighborhood was using their own tactics against them. Every time an inspector left empty-handed, the laughter from across the street grew louder. Still, they refused to quit. Their final play was the boldest yet. Margaret dialed the fire department directly one evening, her voice dripping with false urgency. "There's a dangerous situation here on Maplewood Drive," she insisted. "Too many open flames, gas canisters stored improperly, people risking lives. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." The fire trucks roared in the next day, red lights flashing, sirens blaring. Neighbors dropped what they were doing, startled by the sudden arrival. Children peeked out from behind their parents, wide-eyed as firefighters spilled onto the street. The sisters hurried out, pointing dramatically at the houses there. "Over there," Lydia cried, her voice shrill with excitement. "It's an accident waiting to happen. Shut it all down." The fire captain, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair, listened patiently before walking over to the nearest grill. He inspected it closely, then another, then walked the length of the street. His expression grew more puzzled with each step. The grills were all properly placed, propane tanks secured, and fire extinguishers nearby exactly as the neighbors had prepared. Finally, the captain turned to the sisters, his voice firm. "Ma'am, everything here is in compliance. These residents are doing it right. I don't see a hazard." The sisters sputtered, their arms waving wildly. But it's dangerous. They're reckless." The captain shook his head. "The only thing dangerous here is wasting emergency resources on false calls. If this happens again, you could be the ones facing consequences." His words carried the weight of authority, and the neighbors erupted in cheers. The fire trucks rolled away, leaving the sisters pale and shaking with fury. Across the street, Maplewood Drive broke into celebration, music blasting, laughter echoing louder than ever. Families toasted with lemonade, children danced in the street, and the community's bond grew even stronger. For the first time, Lydia and Margaret realized they weren't just fighting individuals, they were fighting an entire neighborhood united against them. And though their clipboards were still clutched tightly in their hands, they had never felt so powerless. The sisters retreated into their houses, slamming the doors behind them. The blinds snapped shut, but everyone knew they were still watching, still scheming. The battle wasn't over, but Maplewood Drive was ready. Tense. Maplewood Drive carried on with its newfound spirit of unity, but everyone knew the Karen sisters weren't finished. They were like storm clouds, looming silently behind their blinds, always watching, always waiting for the chance to strike again. The neighbors joked about it sometimes, but underneath the laughter there was a quiet unease. What would the sisters try next? Inside their adjoining houses, Lydia and Margaret were unraveling. They sat hunched at their kitchen tables late into the night, surrounded by papers, bylaws, and complaint forms. Their once smug confidence had been chipped away piece by piece, but still, their obsession burned. They could not accept defeat, not from their neighbors, not from the HOA, and certainly not from the police or fire department. To them, this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about power, control, and pride. "They're mocking us," Margaret fumed one night, slamming her clipboard down. "Every barbecue, every gathering, it's like they're daring us to stop them." Lydia's face was pale but determined. "Then we'll stop them, not with warnings, not with inspectors, something bigger. If they won't follow the rules, we'll make them pay for breaking them." Her plan was their boldest and most reckless yet. The sisters drafted a letter to the county council, filled with exaggerated claims, safety violations, illegal gatherings, disruptive behavior. They painted Maplewood Drive as a lawless community spiraling out of control. And at the same time, Lydia contacted a local news reporter, hoping to shame the neighborhood on television. In their minds, the neighbors would be crushed under the weight of bad publicity and government pressure. But the neighborhood was ready. When the letter reached the council, Kevin, the neighbor who worked in local government, got wind of it almost immediately. He called a meeting that evening, and families gathered once again in Mrs. Lopez's driveway, their faces lit with both worry and determination. Kevin explained everything: the lies, the accusations, the attempt to drag Maplewood's name through the mud. Instead of panicking, the neighbors acted. They decided to respond not with anger, but with proof. Over the past weeks they had documented everything: the sisters' harassment, their false reports, their attempts to intimidate. Photos, recordings, even statements from the police and fire department. All of it was compiled into a thick folder of evidence. When the county council called a hearing to review the complaints, the entire block showed up together. Parents, kids, grandparents. Every seat in the chamber was filled with Maplewood residents wearing matching shirts that read, "Community over control." The sisters arrived too, clutching their clipboards like shields, convinced they had the upper hand. The meeting began with Lydia's fiery speech. She painted herself and Margaret as the last defenders of order, battling against a neighborhood of chaos. Margaret followed, her voice trembling with righteous indignation, listing supposed violations that made the council members exchange skeptical glances. Then it was the community's turn. Kevin stood first, calm and steady, presenting their folder of evidence. He detailed the sisters' false reports, their harassment, their abuse of emergency services. Parents spoke about their children being frightened by sirens and inspectors. Officers and even the fire captain had submitted written statements confirming that Maplewood was in full compliance. As the testimonies poured in, the sisters' faces darkened, their arguments unraveled, their once confident voices reduced to mutters and protests. By the end of the hearing, the council had heard enough. They dismissed the sisters' complaints as baseless and warned them about filing further false reports. In a final blow, the council announced that the HOA board would review the sisters' positions of authority. If their behavior continued, they could be stripped of their privileges entirely. The room erupted in applause. Maplewood Drive had won. The sisters, red-faced and trembling with fury, stormed out of the chamber without a word, their clipboards clutched tightly to their chests like broken shields. Back on Maplewood Drive, the victory became a celebration bigger than any before. That weekend, the community hosted another cookout, this one larger, louder, and more joyful than ever. Music filled the air, grills sizzled, and children raced up and down the street without fear. The police stopped by again, this time not because they were called, but because they'd been invited. Even the fire captain appeared, laughing as he accepted a plate of ribs. The sisters stayed inside, blinds drawn, their houses dark and silent. They had lost the battle, and though everyone knew they'd probably never change, it didn't matter anymore. They no longer had power over the community. Their threats and clipboards had been defeated by something stronger: unity. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights flickered on, Maplewood Drive glowed with laughter, music, and togetherness. Families who had once barely spoken now felt like one big extended family. And while the sisters still lurked behind their curtains, the neighborhood had moved beyond fear. The cookout wasn't just a party anymore, it was a symbol of victory. A reminder that no matter how loud or controlling a few people might be, they could never silence the joy of a community that stood together. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky above the cul-de-sac, neighbors raised their cups in a toast. To Maplewood, Mrs. Lopez said proudly, her smile wide, to laughter, to freedom, and to never letting anyone take this away again. The cheers echoed into the night, strong and unbroken. The battle was over. Maplewood Drive was free.